everyone, I hope you're all really well. Welcome, or indeed welcome back to the channel. If you are new, don't forget to hit subscribe because it would be absolutely lovely to have you here with me, particularly as I am so close to 200 subscribers, although the chances are by the time I've edited and uploaded this, I may have already got there. I feel like getting to 100 subscribers took forever, and then getting to 200 seems to have happened really quickly, so thank you so much if you've subscribed to the channel because it just means the world to me. It's amazing. Anyway, in terms of today's video, if you don't know me and the channel that well at all, I like to test foundation. I like to test foundation a lot. Mainly because we're all on this quest of trying to find the perfect foundation that will tick all of the boxes. And after I've done quite a few foundation tests, because all of my tests are done under kind of first impressions kind of scenarios, I obviously go on to test them further with maybe different moisturisers, primers, setting powders, and I experiment around with them a little bit just to kind of solidify my thoughts on how I felt about something. Sometimes I've been surprised and actually quite liked something a little bit more than I thought I first did, but most of the time I just think, yeah, I did not like that foundation at all. So when I've done, say, around 6 foundation reviews, I like to do a video like this, and really it's just taking you through those 6 foundations really quickly just to give you an update on how I've got on with them and whether I've liked things even more or whether I've just still really not liked things, because as handy as first impressions are, it's obviously the ongoing testing that really makes a difference. Because I know what a big deal getting the right foundation is, that's why I treat this separately, so it has its very own little video so that I can just give you an update on how I've been getting on. Of course, if something's amazing, it will probably get mentioned in Best and Worst of Beauty. Likewise, if something is rubbish, then it will probably get mentioned in Best and Worst of Beauty. So that's that bit of spiel out the way. So I've made a list in my little notebook of what foundations I tested. I have done a previous update video already. I'm actually behind. I should have recorded this ages ago. But it does involve having to rewear some stuff that perhaps I didn't really like, so it can be quite hard sometimes. But in the first video, if you want to go check that one out to get a summary of my thoughts on these foundations, then I'll pop a card up so you can go have a look at it. In my first foundation update, I did Tarte Amazonian Clay, Clinique Beyond Perfecting, Too Faced Born This Way, Giorgio Armani Luminous Silk. That was a Freudian slip, because yes, I did not like that foundation. Kat Von D Lock-It and Revlon Colorstay 2-in-1 Compact Foundation and Concealer. Coming up in this video, we have NARS All Day Luminous, L'Oreal Infallible Matte, Urban Decay All Nighter, Revlon Colorstay for Oily Skin, L'Oreal True Match, and Becca Ultimate Coverage. So I'm going to try and keep it to 6 foundations each time, I think, because it is quite a lot to talk about. I've got lots of swatches to show you, so let's get on with talking about these different foundations. As you may or may not know, my skin type is oily, I'm quite pale, I do tend to reach for the lightest shades available within a foundation range. I believe I have pink undertones from the different tests that you can do. Basically, any foundation that looks yellowy tends to look rubbish on me, so I usually end up with foundations that do run a bit more sort of beigey or pinky. The first foundation that I want to talk about today is NARS All Day Luminous. Now, All Day Luminous, when you have oily skin, is a little bit like, really? But I'd heard so many good things about this foundation that I just wanted to try it anyway. And I managed to pick up this cute little sample. This one I actually got after buying this one from eBay. The first shade I got was Mont Blanc, which was very pale. And then I think this sample came from Phil Unique's Pick and Mix service. And this is in Deauville, if I remember rightly. Yes, it is. It's a really weird foundation in so much as it's almost water-like. It's very thin and the most liquidy foundation I've probably ever used. It blends, therefore, like an absolute dream. It's beautiful to blend, and obviously it feels very lightweight as well when you've put it on, because it's not like a thick heavy cream or anything. but it does just blend down absolutely beautifully. It just did not work for my oily skin, in spite of whatever product I used underneath, on top of it, my current Holy Grail moisturiser, which is also a primer, which I know is really good for controlling my oil, and using my current Holy Grail setting powder on top, which is NARS Translucent Crystal, I still went oily after no time at all. It was literally about 3 or 4 hours, and I know that I can get better oil control out of other combinations of products that I've been using. So it's a real shame that I didn't get on with this, because it is so lightweight and beautiful. Just that little bit I've put on my hand there has already dried down, and it doesn't really feel like it's going anywhere. So I think if you had the right skin type, maybe normal to slightly dry, then you'd probably be okay with it. It would blend really nicely. The coverage is really nice as well. It can be built up upon itself. But if you had quite dry skin, I'm not sure that this would work for you, because on the areas where I do suffer from dryness, which is generally this area here, it did not look pretty at all. And no matter what kind of heavy duty moisturiser I put on in that area, it just wasn't happening. Another thing that it does as well, when my oils do start to come through, it breaks the product down, and you can literally kind of draw a pattern on your forehead. It starts to feel very unpleasant quite quickly, and as much as I can get oily with other foundations and maybe just retouch and do a bit of a blot or whatever and I'm good to go, with this you're kind of almost having to reapply it all again, because it just starts to run off your face. So it's a really sad one, unfortunately. I am glad that I tried it, but I did not like this one. Next up, I tried my current Holy Grail foundation, and I could not be happier about finding not only a Holy Grail foundation, but also finding it from the drugstore. Yes, it was L'Oreal Infallible Matte. I do have 2 different shades here. I've got Porcelain and Vanilla 10 and 11, because Vanilla is the one that I've been using for quite some time, but it is slightly too dark, whereas Porcelain I found is actually slightly too light. So mixing these together, as long as I get the proportions right and only use a little bit of Porcelain, actually works really well. This stuff, where do I begin? I was re-watching my first impressions video the other day, because I just wanted to see what my reaction was to it, and I was looking at how it looked on camera, and my skin looked so good. I was actually really quite impressed, because I couldn't remember what my initial first thoughts were, because it feels like I tested it such a long time ago. Not only is this really affordable, I think it's like $7.99 per tube, or at least that's what I've been paying for it from Superdrug. It's usually on offer, so L'Oreal have maybe 3 for 2, and it just makes it so unbelievably affordable. I mean, already you're getting slightly more in here than you are a usual foundation anyway. These are 35ml, so you are getting 5ml more than a standard sort of foundation size of 30ml. But it's just a beautiful foundation. You don't really need to powder with this one. I have experimented powdering on top of it, and I had some concerns in my first impressions video that it would look a bit cakey if you powdered, but if you have a very light hand and you just put the powder where you know you're really going to need it, which for me is forehead, nose, and sort of this part of my cheek randomly, then it just helps control those areas a little bit more. And I can literally get a full day's use out of wearing this and still be looking pretty flawless at the end of the day. It's amazing. From a texture point of view, what I like about this is it's actually not as heavy duty as some full coverage foundations are, or high coverage foundations. It's not as creamy or thick or difficult to blend as some of those are. This one is actually really nice and quick and easy to blend. But once you've got it on, and if you have a look at my first impressions video, you'll see what I mean. It does not move. It's extremely long wearing. It does build up in layers quite nicely, so if you wanted to go for something a little bit more subtle and pared back, then you can definitely do that with this. It will just give you a really nice natural level of coverage and give you that kind of almost powdered like finish, which feels really silky soft and smooth to the touch. So it is my current Holy Grail. I absolutely love this foundation so much, and I've tried foundations that are so much more expensive than this, that are just nowhere near as good in terms of the finish that I want, how a product feels, how easy it is to apply. I am still blown away by how good this foundation is, particularly with how affordable it is as well. So it gets a massive, massive thumbs up from me. Next up, I tested out the very YouTube famous Urban Decay All Nighter. I feel like the world went into some kind of meltdown when this foundation came out. Everybody wanted to try it. Everybody thought it was amazing. It was like this fantastic thing. I was seeing some of my favourite British beauty bloggers rave about it, and I just thought, I'm going to have to give it a go. But I'd heard that it oxidised a lot. So I did pick it up in 2 different shades. I got 0.5 and 1.5. The 0.5 of the range is for pink undertones, whereas the straight numbers, such as 1, 2, etc., are for yellow undertones. So I picked up 2 that I knew were good for my, I believe to be, pink undertoned complexion, and I found that 0.5 was definitely very pale, whereas 1.5 worked that little bit better for me. Even though it's quite a thick foundation, it was actually one that was okay to blend, and I found that because of the fact that it was a thicker foundation, it was easier to blend out with a sponge. I quite often find that when it comes to deciding how I choose to blend out a foundation, the ones that are a bit lighter in terms of texture, I usually prefer to use a brush, and the ones that are thicker or creamier or stiffer to blend, a sponge works a lot better. So I did find that a sponge worked really well with this foundation, because upon blending it out with my Zoeva 104 or any other kind of foundation brush, I found that it was quite stiff to work with, and it can start to look a bit funny, and it just wasn't giving me the kind of flawless looking coverage that I was aiming for really. Whereas with a damp sponge, it just helps shear the product out a little bit and help it melt and mesh within the skin really. So a sponge for me was definitely the way to go with this one. You may have heard that this foundation oxidizes, and I did actually do a test in my first impressions video just to see if it did indeed oxidize, and it does. So if you want to see how much these shades change once the foundation had been exposed to the air, check that video out. It's right at the end, and I just show you a comparison of an old swatch against a fresh one, and there is a good shade or 2 difference. So I can imagine that if you got your shade slightly wrong for this foundation and it oxidized, then you would be in some kind of trouble. I found with this foundation that even when I blended it out really carefully and took my time even with a sponge, it still gathered in some funny texture areas I've got. I don't know whether it's my age or I just have funny forehead skin, I don't know. I have to say that really carefully. I'm glad that came out okay. My forehead skin, it does have funny texture where foundation sits in it, and I have to really work hard to buff it in so that it doesn't kind of gather and look a bit weird. And I found that even upon initial application of blending this, it just wasn't really looking very pleasant, so it was sitting in those areas quite funny. I also found that in spite of using various things underneath and on top of this foundation, I still got oily with it as well. So if you're an oily girl like me and you want something that's going to control your oil, even with using various oil controlling products, I'm not sure if Urban Decay All Nighter is great for people with oily skin. Next up, I went back to the drugstore again because I was feeling pretty confident about the drugstore in comparison to some of the higher end products that I've been using. So I decided to put to the test a foundation which I feel like gets a lot of love in the beauty community from a drugstore point of view. And it was this one from Revlon, and it's their colorstay foundation specifically for oily and combination skin. And I got mine in the shade Buff, which is 150. I was so excited to try this, but unfortunately this has just been a big letdown. I don't get what the hype is. I really don't. So many people love this foundation. I just think it's not very nice at all. It's okay, it goes on alright, it blends out fairly okay, but again, it was another one that I found that just started to settle into pores, into my funny skin issues, and it just started to look very obvious because this is another very long wearing foundation. So you need to make sure you're obviously getting it in exactly the right place from the get-go. Otherwise you're just going to be staring at that foundation sat funny for the rest of the day, unless you decide to wash it off, of course. I also found that the coverage wasn't that great with this either. It was a bit of a faff to kind of build up the coverage and get it to a point that I was really happy with how it was looking. Overall, just a really big disappointment with this one. In spite of the fact that it does say it's for combination oily skin, I don't think it's actually that great for oily skin, or at least it's not for mine anyway. In my experience of trying this out, I still get pretty oily, which I can kind of forgive if the product is okay to start off with, if it blends really nice, if it's just a case of lightly touching it up. But this wasn't that great from the get-go, to be honest. From using it, applying it, the way that it sits in your pores a bit funny, and because of the fact that it is a very long 24-hour kind of foundation, it's very long wearing, you need to make sure that it's looking great from the start. And I could just never get it looking at a point that I was happy with. I always looked in the mirror after applying it and thinking, why did I pick this up again? I don't like it. Next up, I went back to the drugstore again in the hope that I might find something else that was actually quite good. So I went for L'Oreal this time, and it was L'Oreal's True Match, because again, I feel like this is a drugstore foundation that does get quite a lot of love. This is their super blendable foundation, but it is for all skin types. So it does make me a little bit worried when it is one of those ones that isn't specifically designed for my skin type. I picked mine up in the shade 1N, which is Ivory, and I think it was a pretty good match for me. It's one of these foundations which, if you look at the bottle, there's definitely like some kind of shimmery luminescence going on as well, which can be a little bit off-putting, but it's not noticeable on the skin at all. I really like how this one blends. I felt like it blended really effortlessly, and it did actually look really nice on initial application, although I did find that the coverage with this isn't actually that great, and it's not one that I found that I could really build up to help with the coverage, so I did have to use a pretty good concealer with this as well. Unfortunately, this is yet another one that even after a few hours I just start to look very oily with, in spite of using my various products that I have in my combat oiliness arsenal. So it's okay. I think if you had sort of normal to dry skin, this would probably be quite a nice foundation. It is nice and easy and quick to use. It does blend beautifully, but for my oily skin, it just wasn't any good, unfortunately. Lastly, I went to sort of higher end product testing again, and I feel like this foundation had been on my radar for a long time. It's the Becca Ultimate Coverage Complexion Perfecting Cream, I think is its full title. Has a very long name. So many people I found on YouTube were recommending this foundation for oily skin. So I just thought, right, let's get a sample and let's just try it and see if it is actually any good. It's another one of these foundations that's quite a thick one, so it's quite stiff and tricky to blend, so you do need to take your time with it. You do get a pretty decent level of coverage with this one, so that one was absolutely fantastic. But I did find that when this one wears off, it kind of wears off in big patches, and I found that it was my dry area that suffered first. It completely wore off my chin, and I don't know why that is, and I've tried it in various different combinations of products, but it does tend to be my dry areas that tend to go first. So I don't know if there's something to that or not, but unfortunately it's the same story again. It's the oiliness that's also an issue. So not only is the foundation kind of falling off my dry areas, but it's also just sliding around the rest of my face as well. So unfortunately this Becca foundation was also a fail from me as well. So I think that's it in terms of just going through those 6 foundations. If you want any more detail than what I've gone into, then have a look at those first impressions videos, because obviously you'll be able to see application properly, and you'll obviously be able to see my final thoughts after I've been wearing it for a full day as well. Not the greatest test in terms of testing 6 different foundations, but let's not forget I have found a current holy grail. So I'm now looking for something to beat it, because there might be something out there. Don't get me wrong, the L'Oreal Infallible Matte, as amazing as it is, I still sometimes get a little bit frustrated with it because it's not 100% perfect. I don't put it on and look at my face and think, wow, you know, flawless, amazing skin, because obviously it comes down to how you're feeling on the day, how your skin is, whether you've got any breakouts going on, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of other factors that go into it. But in terms of finding a foundation that, for the most part, does work really well for me, and it's a pleasure to pick up, and I want to reach for it at the end of the day, I want to use it, then it does tick all of those boxes. In terms of what I'm looking for in a foundation, I would say my hit list is kind of easy to use and apply, so not too tricky to blend out, something that's going to be very quick and easy to use, something that helps control oil, although I know that a lot of that will come from the other products that I'm using, but something that will at least help in controlling oil, something that looks quite natural as well. I don't want to be walking around making it look really obvious that I've got a ton of makeup on my face, although I'm sure that a lot of the time that is the case, but just something that looks very natural, but it still offers you a fairly decent level of coverage to kind of obliterate all of the stuff that you've got going on. So even out skin tone really nicely and be able to deal with varying different issues on your face in terms of you might have a bit of dryness, you might have a bit of oiliness, that kind of thing. So I do have quite a wish list when it comes to foundation shopping, but there are so many more foundations out there to try, and I feel like I've hardly tried any. So if you have any recommendations of foundations that you think are worth me checking out, leave a comment down below, because I would be really interested to have a look into trying some more foundations, because like I said, I just love testing them. So that's it for today's video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, I would really appreciate a thumbs up down below, because it does really help support my channel. And if you are new here and would like to see more content like this from me, I will pop a button just here so you can click it and get notified of new content as and when it gets uploaded. And I will also pop a link to my last video just up here, so if you've not seen that one, you can click it and check that one out too. Anyway, I hope you're all doing really well, and I will see you again soon. Bye!